Hi there, it's me, Annalisa Boyd, Orthodox Christian wife, mom to 8, bread baker, candy maker, self-proclaimed doula, accidental midwife, and the author of the Ascetic Lives of Mothers, Hear Me, and Special Agents of Christ, all through Ancient Faith Publishing. Today, I may cry because I'm going to be sharing a little bit of the story from the last months and days of my good friend and godmother, Terry Beck. And those stories are full of joy and sorrow, so I may cry. Actually, I'm about to cry. Don't cry. Okay, so why am I going to share this, and why am I sharing this right now? Well, as we enter the last days before Pascha, before the great rejoicing, Lent gets hard. Everything seems to slow down because we are walking that journey alongside Christ to his cross. And we are remembering what it means to be a Christian, not just for this week, but for the rest of our lives. What it means to be a Christian, what it means to follow Christ, and what it means to take up that cross and follow him. Well, a few years ago, I got a phone call from my godmother, and she said she was concerned because she wasn't feeling well. Something felt really off. She was in some pain. She felt nauseous all the time. And when I hung up, I told my husband that I thought bad news was coming. And I was right. She had pancreatic cancer. She was in a lot of pain. She was still momming, too. She was 59 years old when she found out the diagnosis. And at that point, she had a 4-year-old still. They had adopted several children. They did foster care for 30 years and just were an amazing example to us. But she was this very strong, practical woman. Very, very wise. Very wise. We went walking most mornings for several years before we moved to Colorado. Our husbands had worked on staff at a Christian conference center together for 12 years, and then we became Orthodox, and we went from just friendship to being sisters, and she became my godmother and her husband our priest. So that was an amazing the thing that happened in our lives over the years. I was very discouraged because I wasn't able to be in California with her. Here I was in Colorado, she was in California, and I felt so helpless. And I didn't understand because I felt like, not everybody's prepared for this kind of thing. Not everybody's prepared or knows how to help people who are becoming more and more needy as their health deteriorates. But I was raised with a grandma who, she was on life support, I don't know how many times, and she was very disabled, and we had to help her in a whole lot of different ways. And so it wasn't something that was going to be a problem for me. I saw my grandmother's heart stop. I was in the ICU with her, where I'd seen her before, right after prom, and talking to her about prom. And all of a sudden, she got a funny look on her face, and all the bells and whistles went off on all of her machines she was hooked up onto, and everybody rushed into the hospital room, to the ICU room. And at first, they didn't even see me, and I just stood there watching because it was very interesting what they were doing. And then they're like, you have to leave, you have to leave. And I was like, bye, Grandma, see you later. They must have thought I was completely insane and unfeeling. But I had seen this before. I had seen her nearly die throughout my whole life. Something was always happening. And she didn't die. She didn't die at that time either. So it was something, I felt I was so prepared to be there for my dear friend, for my godmother. And God had other plans, and that was really hard to accept. So instead of being there physically, I decided to be there through letters of encouragement. She and I used to go walking. We went walking most mornings when I lived in California. We'd go super, super early while the kids were still asleep. And sometimes we'd go while it was still dark. It was in the middle of winter. But we had the best conversations. We had some of the funniest moments. There was a time where she felt like her foot hit something dead and she got worried. And so she pulled me in front of her as a shield. And then we found out it was a Thanksgiving turkey carcass and we were safe. But we had these wonderful moments, these wonderful talks about children and foster care and everything else. And so I decided to take up those walks, but they were going to be long distance. And we had a really good time together during the struggle. Toward the end of her life, it felt like everything was getting quiet. And if you have had the opportunity to be at a birth, or if you remember the birth of your own child, most likely, once you were going through transition, once the baby was really preparing to come out, the mood of everyone in the room changed. It went from maybe a little more lighthearted and excitedly anticipating to, okay, the real work's beginning. Everything kind of gets quiet as you're ready for this new life to birth into the world. Well, death is similar as you are waiting for your loved one or yourself to be birthed into eternity, into God's kingdom. And that's what it was like those last days. I was able to speak with her a few days before she passed, and her last words to me were, "I will pray for you in heaven." And those were the last words that I heard. And I prayed for her those last days and many, many people were praying for her, I know, and scuffing their knees on her behalf. And then she passed in her home. Well, about a year later, her husband wrote a final entry on the blog that had been set up to follow her progress, follow her treatments and everything, give people updates so people weren't calling the house all the time. And I'm just going to read a little bit of what he wrote because I think it is very helpful for Holy Week to change our perspectives. He said, "I had just returned home from a busy work day that included getting the kids ready for school, dropping them off at their preschool, elementary school, and high school. It was a rather full day of activity for me. When I came home, I went to see how Terry was doing and to talk with her about the day like we often did. The room was dark, and I could hear the air pump inflating her hospital bed mattress. I knew I needed to shift gears, slow down, and be there for her as best I could. I asked how things were going. Her tears were my only answer. I began to share with her my day and what was going on with the kids and all the busyness of the day. After a moment, she interrupted me. She asked me not to bring distractions into her situation. She let me know that life is now passing from her, and she can no longer be concerned with the details expressed in this world. She said she must now focus on seeing Christ's face, focus on the life in the next world. She wisely informed me that by this cross she was bearing, the world was now being crucified to her, and she to the world. She had always been good at being concerned for others and their details, but now was different. Now she needed to focus on the one thing necessary, her final cross. This process of detaching obviously is appropriate at one season and very inappropriate at another. There is a time to sow and a time to reap. There is a time to throw stones and a time to refrain from throwing stones. And there is a time to live and a time to die. Terry's time required a detaching from all that this world had been to her, so that she could move into the realm where there is no season or time. While we draw the breath of life, we are to walk in life, with the understanding that life on this earth is temporal. It is not our eternal dwelling place. It is to be lived as a sojourner in this world, not as a permanent resident. None of us can afford to miss this point. We are to lay down our distracting burden and take up his light yoke. We are not our own. We have been bought with a price. We must learn to wean ourselves from the distractions and attachments that can so easily prevent us from pleasing the one who enlisted us, from experiencing the glory of God in the face of Christ Jesus. That is exactly what we're doing. That is exactly what the church year is set up to do for us, to help us learn to lay down all those distractions, to help us remember that we are not our own, to help us remember to take up our own cross and follow him, and to help us remember the cross of Christ, the cross that he willingly bled and died on so that we could be with him in eternity. So, during these last days, let yourself slow down. Try to avoid the distractions or not to be burdened by the necessary distractions. And let's keep on working out our salvation, one mama moment at a time.